Hello, welcome to my bookshelf, and today I'm super excited to share with you all the books that I read in the month of August. So let's just jump into my stats for the month. So in total, I read 5 books like I've said, and that comes to 1,649 pages total, which is pretty good, I think. It turns out I read 2 books from male authors, 2 books from female authors, and 1 book that was actually a collaboration between a male author and a female author, so no matter how you slice it, I evened out the male versus female counter. As far as publication date goes, not a whole lot of variety. The oldest book that I read was published in 2002, so that was 15 years ago. So not exactly that diverse as far as publication date goes. I read 2 books from the 2000s and 3 books from the 2010s. As far as star rating goes, also not a whole lot of variety there. For the books, I gave 4 out of 5 stars, and only 1 book got a different rating, which happened to be a 3-star rating. Now, as far as genres go, 3 of the books had some kind of science fiction leaning, but they were all very different kinds of science fiction, so I pride myself on that at least. One was exclusively a memoir, and the other one was this middle school thriller. But that all being said, let's just jump into the books I actually read this month. So I like to kind of give each book a superlative, if you will, like best dressed and all that. So the first book is the book that was the most predictable. So not exactly a sought after title, but what can I say? That would be Girl Stolen by April Henry. I don't want you to think that I hated this book. I didn't. I gave it 3 stars, so I enjoyed it, but I didn't really, love it, it was just okay. That's kind of what my 3-star rating means. It's just okay, enjoyable at parts, but really not that great overall. And really the problem with this book is just that I'm not its target demographic, so I'm pretty sure this is aimed at middle schoolers. So I would say that I think that this would be a good book for, young adults, middle schoolers to read. I'm nothing against that, but as a 25-year-old, it was just too predictable. And I think another problem with this book is that I didn't really connect with all of the characters very well. So other than our main 2 characters, it's one of those stories that you get 2 different perspectives, just going on throughout the book, back and forth. The side characters are so flat. The main characters are fleshed out a decent amount. We get a lot of insight on what it's like to be blind, because the main character is blind. If you don't know, our main character is a 16-year-old girl who happens to be blind, and she was accidentally kidnapped by someone who was just trying to hijack the car that she was in. So it's a really interesting premise, but it just kind of falls flat for me. And like I said, the other characters that are not the 2 people that we, get their perspectives from are very flat, very stereotypical. But I do like that we get a lot of insight about what it's like to be blind, and that part was really interesting to see how she copes with just simple tasks that you take for granted as a sighted person. So I would love to just read more about her own just normal life, being someone who was sighted but was in an accident and became blind and having to cope with that. That part sounded way more interesting than this book ended up being for me. Not a bad book overall, but I'm not the target demographic, and it just was rather predictable. Okay, so the next book that I read this month was the most thought-provoking book, and that was Stories of Real Life and Others by Ted Chiang. Now, this is a short story science fiction collection. Overall, I really enjoyed Ted Chiang's writing. I was very engaged throughout the entire thing. I liked that all the short stories were very different from each other. They were just really interesting, I thought, and very smart. I will say that this collection might not be for everyone. Some of his short stories are very, very scientific and intellectual, and he does a decent job, I think, of trying to explain these very difficult, complicated scientific thinking. But I could also see how some people it would go completely over their head and they just wouldn't understand any of it. I don't pretend to have understood everything in every single story that he talks about, but I at least understand enough of it to get what he's talking about and like what the story's about. But that could definitely be a drawback for some people. It's just that some of it is just a bit too deep into the scientific field, I guess. So it can be kind of complicated to understand. But I think that they're very interesting ideas, and it was just a really enjoyable experience overall, even if some of the stories fell flat. Okay, so the next book that I read this month was the book that had the best thrill ride, and that was Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the first in the Illuminae Files trilogy. The third and final book has not come out yet, so even though I absolutely love this book, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm going to hold off on reading Gemina because I want to pace myself for the third one, which is going to be released in March, I believe. This is a science fiction story, but it's told in a unique way, which I appreciate. So, I kind of relate it to like a found footage situation. So there's a lot of like surveillance footage that's been transcribed by someone. There's instant messaging in here as well. There's just straight up confidential files and, you know, audio transcripts and interviews and journal entries and just a whole bunch of different kinds of ways of telling the story. It wasn't exactly something that you jumped in right away and you understood everything. It took me a little bit to really get into the feel of it because it is different. But, you know, once you're in it, like, I feel like you're in it. Like, it was just so engaging once you get past, like, the first, you know, fourth of the book and, like, the setup and all that and understanding who these characters are, what their situation is, because it is set in the future. You know, on a different planet and all that. So it takes a little bit to get oriented to, but really is not that bad. And it was just so fun by the end of it. It was absolutely so much fun. It looks intimidating, but honestly, it really isn't as bad as it seems. Okay, so the next book that I read this month was the book that was the most relatable to me, and that was Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. This is a memoir, and Anna Kendrick is just amazing, just as a person, but especially as an actress and a performer. And it was just so much fun to really get to know her. Because, you know, I've seen interviews from her, but it's really not quite the same, you know, as reading from her and her perspective and just, you know, learning more about her life and where she came from and all that kind of stuff. I also love memoirs and the fact that you get to really just, you know, see things from their perspective and get like a glimpse of their personality in a way that you don't in like an interview. I felt like if I was in those situations that she describes, that I would react the same way. So I really felt connected to her, and just she's so relatable and she's so funny and human in this, and I kind of want to say dorky, but in a good way. Like, you know, kind of like that lovable, just human person. It was a lot of fun to read. And one of the best things about it was just, you know, how she's able to make fun of herself and just be a real person. It was just really cool. The ending of the book, she writes her own, like, you know, sometimes in books there's like a reader's guide where, you know, you get together and you ask each other like deep intellectual questions about the book. And she like writes up her own, and it's so ridiculous and so funny, and it was just like a perfect ending to me. I just thought it was great. If you're an Anna Kendrick fan, you definitely have to read this. It was just really fun to get a perspective on things and also just to find out more about her. Okay, so the last book that I read this month was the most character-driven story, and that would be Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And this is really hard one to describe, but I'm gonna do my best. It's a dystopian on some level, but it's not set in the future. It's actually supposed to be a contemporary book, kind of. Like I said, not easy to describe. So it's also coming of age tale. So we meet up with our characters when they're, you know, children, middle schoolers, I believe, and we see them grow up into adults. So the beginning of the book is probably set in like the 80s, and then I think their adult years is supposed to be in the early 2000s when this was published. So it's kind of contemporary, but at the same time, they're living in this kind of isolated place away from, you know, our traditional world, I guess. So while it's somewhat contemporary, it's not exactly a normal experience that people would have. There's some elements that are traditional, just like growing up experiences, but a lot of it is just because of this unique dystopian-esque reality. So I don't want to really give away what makes it different, because part of the story is kind of slowly uncovering it for yourselves and just kind of being delved into the universe and just seeing how these characters interact with other people in their world and with each other. And like I said, it's a very character-driven story. So while you're kind of slowly uncovering, you know, what makes this world different from our own, it really isn't necessarily about that either. It really is just a lot about the characters and, like I said, how they react to things and, you know, their lot in life and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of really interesting things about growing up and being just a normal person, but also like their unique situation. It is a slow burn, if you will. The pacing is a little slower than most books nowadays, but I found it to be very enjoyable. I gave it 4 to 5 stars. It's not exactly a book that's easy to pitch to people, but I think that if any of that sounded interesting, you should pick it up. It's like I said, it is different, even from a normal like dystopian. It has a different feel from a typical dystopian. That's why I hesitate to really even call it that, but I really don't know what else to call it, so just gonna leave it at that. So it's a very interesting story, and I really enjoyed the writing, and so I definitely want to read more books from him in the future. So like I said, I really enjoyed it, and it was a good book to end the month out on. Okay, so those were the books that I read in the month of August. I feel very proud of myself for finishing 5 out of my 9 books on my TBR, which is pretty good. I want to get better at reading more books, or perhaps I should just be easier on myself and have a smaller TBR, but as you'll see in September, I don't do that. I just have a hard time containing myself, and I just want to read everything all at once, all right now. It's kind of a problem. But at least I'm finishing more books than I did before I started BookTube. So I want to thank you guys for just being here and kind of pushing me to read more. So thank you. Alright, so like always, I want to thank you for watching this video, and until next time.